The ashes of what was the smell of rain on hot asphalt always brought him back to the funeral. It was the scent of endings. Elias Vance stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, 60 stories above a city that pulsed with light and ambition. But all he could smell was the wet earth of a country graveyard. 3 years. It felt like a lifetime in the blink of an eye. He could still see the cheap, polished pine of the casket, so unlike the rich mahogany of his desk. He could feel the bewildering weight of the handful of dirt he'd been instructed to throw, the grains sticking under his fingernails. He was 17, wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves. Bought just a year prior for a band concert and now his only marker of respectability. His father, Robert Vance, had been a man built of quiet strength and stubborn integrity, a history teacher whose world was maps and battles and the lessons gleaned from both. Their house had smelled of old books, brewing coffee, and the sawdust from the small garage where Robert tirelessly restored a 1965 Mustang that would never, ever run. It was their shared dream, their pointless, beautiful project. They would talk for hours, Elias handing him tools, Robert explaining the fall of empires or the intricacies of a carburetor with equal passion. He died suddenly. An aneurysm, a bolt from the blue that left a 17-year-old boy utterly alone. The life insurance was a joke, barely covering the funeral. The mortgage on their modest house had another 12 years. The Mustang sat under a dusty tarp, a monument to unfinished things. Elias had thought the worst was over. He had no idea. The lawyer's office was beige and smelled of lemon-scented polish. A week after the funeral, he sat across from a man with kind eyes and a folder that contained the dismantling of his life. Elias, the lawyer, Mr. Evans, began gently. There's the matter of your mother, Clara Vance. She'd left when Elias was 6. Her departure wasn't a dramatic slammed door affair. It was a slow fading. The laughter that used to fill the kitchen dwindled. She started taking long walks that turned into afternoon absences, then weekend trips to see a sick friend. Then one Tuesday, she was just gone. A note on the kitchen table written in her looping script. Robert, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. It's suffocating me. Tell Elias I love him. She sent a postcard from Santa Fe a year later. Then nothing. For 11 years, silence. Mr. Evans cleared his throat. As your sole surviving parent, she's been notified of Robert's passing. She's indicated a desire to reconnect. A wild, impossible hope flared in Elias's chest. It was a reflex, a child's desperate need for a mother, a port in this terrifying storm. The door to the office opened. The woman who walked in was not the mother of his memories. The softness was gone, replaced by a sharp, carefully maintained elegance. Her hair was blonder, pulled into a severe chic. She smelled of expensive perfume, not the lavender soap she used to wear. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as his own, scanned the room, the lawyer, and finally him, with a detached, assessing coolness. Elias, she said. Her voice was higher, tighter than he remembered. She didn't move to hug him. Mom? The word felt foreign on his tongue. She offered a thin smile. You've grown. She turned to Mr. Evans. Shall we get to the details? I understand there's the house, a car, and of course guardianship. The meeting was a clinical dissection of Elias's existence. Clara asked precise financial questions. The equity in the house, the value of the car, the terms of Robert's meager pension. She spoke of Elias as if he were an inconvenient package that had been left on her doorstep. Of course, he'll come with me to Chicago, she stated, not asked. I've remarried. My husband, Arthur, is in finance. We can provide opportunities. Elias sat in stunned silence. This wasn't a reunion. It was a corporate acquisition. They drove to the house so she could see what there is to work with. She wrinkled her nose at the shag carpet, sighed at the outdated kitchen, and stared with utter disdain at the photo on the mantelpiece, a picture of the three of them. Elias perched on Robert's shoulders, Clara laughing, her head thrown back. A different woman, a different life. You'll need new clothes, she said, flicking a finger over his sleeve. Arthur's circle is particular. That night, lying in his childhood bed, Elias listened to her on the phone in the living room, her voice a low, irritated murmur. A complete drain, Arthur. Yes, of course, the life insurance is a pittance. The house is a teardown. No, he's not academic, from what I can tell. Just a quiet, sullen thing. Well, we'll find him some junior college program, get him out from underfoot. The hope curdled into a hard, cold knot in his stomach. She didn't want a son. She wanted to minimize an inconvenience. She was embarrassed by him, by his grief, by his father's humble life, by everything he represented. The next morning, he found her at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, a spreadsheet open on her laptop. "We'll list the house with an agent today," she said without preamble. "We'll sell the car for scrap. I've booked us flights for tomorrow." Elias looked at her. He looked at the woman who had abandoned him once and was now preparing to do it again, this time by trying to erase every remnant of the life he'd loved and force him into her shiny, sterile new one. "No," he said. The word was quiet but firm. She looked up, startled. "I'm sorry? I'm not going with you." A faint, patronizing smile touched her lips. "Elias, don't be dramatic. You're a minor. You have no choice. I'll be 18 in 3 months. I'll emancipate myself. I'll stay here." "And do what?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Live in this crumbling house? Finish high school and become a... what? A mechanic like your father?"
"He was a teacher," Elias said, his voice low with the anger he didn't know he possessed.
"A teacher who died broke," she retorted, her mask of civility slipping. "Is that what you want? This poverty of ambition?"
"I want what's left of my family," he shot back, his voice cracking. "I want this house. I want my dad's car. I don't want anything from you." Her eyes went cold. The pretense was over.
"Sentimentality is a luxury for those who can afford it, Elias. You can't. This is a foolish decision." "It's my decision." She stared at him for a long moment, as if truly seeing him for the first time. She saw Robert's stubborn set to his jaw, his quiet resolve. She realized she couldn't bully him, and she certainly wouldn't beg him. "Fine," she said, snapping her laptop shut. "Play the noble orphan. When you're starving and the bank forecloses, don't call me." She stood up, collected her purse and coat. She paused at the door, her back to him. "You're just like him," she said, and it was the greatest insult she could muster. "You'll die in a small town with small dreams and no one will remember you." And then she was gone. The sound of her rental car pulling away was the sound of the last thread snapping. He was truly, utterly alone. The silence in the house was deafening. It was in that silence that the anger found him. It wasn't a hot, raging anger. It was a cold, crystalline fury that settled in his bones. Anger at the universe for taking his father. Anger at his mother for her cruelty, for her abandonment, for her dismissal of the good, honest man who had raised him. He made a vow then, standing in the empty living room. He would not die with small dreams. He would not be forgotten. He would build something so vast, so undeniable that Clara Vance would have to see it. She would have to read about him in the papers she read, hear about him in the circles she so cherished. And she would know with absolute certainty that every brick of his empire was built not because of her, but in spite of her. He would rise from these ashes, and he would do it alone. The Forge. The 3 months until his 18th birthday were a brutal education in survival. Mr. Evans, to his credit, helped delay the bank, arguing for a grace period for the newly orphaned. Elias got a job bagging groceries during the day and stocking shelves at a warehouse at night. He lived on canned soup and a fierce, burning determination. He sold nothing. Not the house, not the Mustang. They were his anchors. He spent his few free hours in the garage. The anger needed an outlet, a focus. The hopeless, tangled mess of the Mustang's engine became his obsession. He pored over his father's shop manuals, his careful notes in the margins. He spent his meager pay on tools, on parts scavenged from junkyards. His hands, once soft from turning pages, grew calloused and stained with grease. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. It kept the grief and the loneliness at bay. He wasn't fixing a car, he was fixing himself. The day he turned 18, he officially owned his own life. He also officially owned his father's debts. The bank's letters became more insistent. It was in the garage late one night that the idea came. He was trying to diagnose a persistent electrical fault, tracing wires through the car's archaic, frustrating loom. He remembered his father talking about the D-Day landings, about the chaos of the battlefield and how the military needed robust, simple communication systems that couldn't fail. Robust, simple, can't fail. His eyes fell on his cheap, glitchy smartphone, its battery perpetually dying. Everyone had them. Everyone hated their fragility, their planned obsolescence, their constant need for charging. What if you could build something else? Not a smarter phone, but a tougher one. A device for people who did things, who built things, who went places where glass screens and delicate chips were a liability. For emergency crews, construction workers, adventurers, people like his father who valued function over flash. The idea struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was so obvious. It was a need nobody was filling because everyone was chasing the next sleek, thin, fragile thing. He began sketching that night. Not on a computer, but in his father's old graph paper notebooks. He designed a housing milled from a single block of aircraft-grade aluminum. He spec'd a processor that was powerful but not cutting-edge, reliable and energy-efficient. He designed a battery that was twice the size of a standard phone's, and a solar charging panel on the back. It would be waterproof, dustproof, shockproof. It would run on a stripped-down, efficient operating system. It would have a physical keypad beneath a ruggedized screen. He called it the Kratos phone, after the Greek personification of strength. He had the vision. He had the design. He had precisely 3,612 cents in savings. He needed capital. He spent a week crafting a business plan. He used the public library's computers, teaching himself terms like venture capital, ROI, and market disruption. He built a financial model that was probably hopelessly naive, but was built on a foundation of sheer, undeniable logic. He cold-called every investor, every firm he could find online. He was laughed at, hung up on, told he was a kid with a silly idea. The tech world was about AI, about social media, about the metaverse, not about a dumb brick for lumberjacks. The rejection was a constant drumbeat. His mother's words echoed in his head. A foolish decision. But the anger was still there, colder and harder than ever. It was his fuel. His break came from the most unlikely source. Old man Henderson, who ran the local hardware store and had been a friend of his father's, heard about his struggle. Henderson called him over one afternoon. "Your dad?" Henderson said, wiping his hands on a rag. "He fixed my delivery van for cost back when I was starting out. Never forgot it." He reached under the counter and pulled out a checkbook. "It's not much. 20 grand. It's my retirement fishing money. Don't make me regret it." Elias was speechless. It was a fortune. It was a lifeline. With that money, he bought the tools he needed. A high-end 3D printer, a small CNC mill. He rented a corner of a forgotten industrial unit. He became a ghost, working 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and obsession. He sourced components himself, bargaining with suppliers in China over shaky video calls, learning about tariffs and shipping logistics on the fly. He produced a prototype. It was ugly, rough, and weighed a ton, but it worked. He threw it across the room. It worked. He submerged it in a bucket of water. It worked. He left it on the roof in the sun for a week, and the battery stayed at 100%. He took his prototype and his refined business plan back to the venture capitalists. This time, it was different. They held the solid, heavy object in their hands. They saw the single-minded purpose in Elias's eyes. He wasn't a naive kid anymore. He was a force of nature. He secured seed funding, then a Series A round. The Kratos phone wasn't a product, it was a statement. The marketing wrote itself. Stop pampering your technology. It launched, and it exploded. Emergency services adopted it en masse. Oil rig workers, surveyors, scientists in Antarctica all found it indispensable. It became a cult icon among a growing movement of people rejecting the constant, demanding connectivity of modern devices. It was a tool, not a leash. Its very lack of smart features was its smartest feature of all. Within 2 years, Kratos Inc. was valued at over $1 billion. Elias Vance, the quiet boy from the nowhere town, was 22 years old and a billionaire. He moved the company headquarters to a glittering tower in the city. He bought the penthouse. He owned the sleek, silent cars his mother's husband probably dreamed of. The world wanted a piece of him. Magazines did profiles on the rugged genius, the philosopher king of tech. And he gave interviews, his answers quiet, measured, and intensely private. He never mentioned his father. He never mentioned his mother. The anger had built his empire. But now that the empire was built, the anger had nowhere to go. It settled inside him, a permanent winter. He was surrounded by people, but the loneliness of that empty house had followed him to the penthouse. He dated beautiful, accomplished women, but he couldn't connect. How could he explain the hollow place inside him? How could they understand that his drive came from a graveyard and a mother's scorn? He was the man his mother had demanded he become. Powerful, wealthy, unforgettable. And he was miserable. He found himself one rainy afternoon wandering the halls of his own company. He ended up in the RD lab, where a team of brilliant engineers was working on the Kratos 2.0. They were arguing about a new feature, a social media integration. Elias picked up the prototype. It was sleeker, a little lighter. It had a few more bells and whistles. It was starting to look familiar, like everything else. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet. The engineers fell silent. "Elias? Why what? Why are we adding this? The people who buy our phone buy it to get away from this. We're not building a better phone. We're building a less bad version of the phones they're trying to escape." He looked around the lab, at the whiteboards covered in complex equations, at the screens filled with code. It was impressive. It was genius. And it was a betrayal of the very idea that had saved him. He had become what he'd rebelled against. He was building complexity. His father had taught him about the beauty of simple, elegant solutions. The carburetor, a well-told story, a life lived with integrity. He'd been so focused on proving his mother wrong, on building a monument to his anger, that he'd forgotten why he'd started building in the first place. He left the lab and went to his office. He stood at the window, watching the rain streak the glass, smelling that ghost of wet asphalt. He thought of the Mustang, still under its tarp in the garage of the house he now owned outright. He thought of the photo on the mantle. The anger had been his fuel, but it was a toxic fuel. It had propelled him to the summit, but the air up here was thin and cold. He had won. And winning felt like ashes. He had spent years building walls to keep the world out, to keep the pain out. But the walls had become his prison. He was the billionaire in the glass tower, and he was the loneliest boy in the world. The phone on his desk buzzed. His assistant's voice. "Elias? There's a woman here to see you. A Mrs. Clara Croft. She says she's your mother." Elias went very still. He looked at his reflection in the rain-blurred glass. He saw the man he had built. He saw the boy he had been. "Send her in," he said, his voice calm. The door opened. Clara walked in. She was older, the sharp edges softened by time and what looked like genuine anxiety. She wore her wealth comfortably, but her eyes darted around the magnificent office, taking in the proof of his success, and finally landed on him. There was no disdain now. There was something like fear, and something like awe. "Elias," she said, her voice small. "Mother," he replied. The word was neutral, a fact. I saw you in Forbes," she said, gesturing weakly to the magazine on his coffee table, his face on the cover. I wanted to see you, to congratulate you." Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. "Arthur," she began, then stopped. Things haven't been, well." There it was. The market had turned. Arthur was in finance. There must have been losses. They'd seen his face on the magazine. She had come because she needed something. She was exactly who she had always been. The last vestige of the boy who had hoped for a mother in that lawyer's office finally died. And with it, the cold anger that had sustained him for so long finally evaporated. It simply left him. He felt empty, but it was a clean emptiness, a quiet space. He didn't hate her. He pitied her. She was a prisoner too. A prisoner of her own avarice, her own shallow ambitions. She had traded a son's love for a husband's wallet, and now that wallet was thin, she had come crawling back to the son she'd discarded. He could have thrown her words back at her. "When you're starving, don't call me." He could have had security escort her out. He could have destroyed her with his wealth, a final, triumphant act of vengeance. But he didn't. He saw the hollow woman before him, and he saw the hollow man he was in danger of becoming. The cycle ended here. "Thank you for coming, Mother," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I appreciate the congratulations." He walked to his desk, picked up a checkbook. He didn't ask what she needed. He didn't want to know. He wrote a figure that was obscenely large, enough to solve any immediate financial problem she might have. He tore it out and handed it to her. Her eyes widened, filling with tears of relief and avarice. "Elias, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "This is a gift, with one condition. Anything. Take it. Live your life, but don't contact me again. Ever." The color drained from her face. She understood. She was being paid off. Severed. Finally and completely. She had gotten what she came for, but she was losing the thing she never really had, and only now realized might have been worth more. She nodded mutely, took the check, and left without another word. The door clicked shut. Elias stood alone in the immense silence of his office. He felt nothing. No triumph, no sorrow, just a chapter closing. He walked back to the window. The rain had stopped. The city glittered below, a world of endless possibility. He knew what he had to do. The anger was gone. The need to prove himself was gone. All that was left was the idea. The simple, elegant, robust idea. He picked up the phone and called his head of RD. "Cancel the Kratos 2.0, he said.
Gather the team. We're going back to the beginning. He was going to build things that mattered. Not for her, not for the magazines, not for the money, for the boy in the garage, handing his father a wrench. For the man who believed in simple, honest things. For himself. Elias Vance, the billionaire, was finally free. And his work, his real work, was just beginning. He was no longer building from ashes. He was building from a foundation of peace.